Con Marcela Gómez Pérez estuvimos en inmediaciones de Villa de Leyva y Sutamarchán. Geóloga de la Universidad Nacional de Colombia, sede Bogotá, con doctorado en Ciencias de la Tierra de la Universidad de Cambridge, en Reino Unido, actualmente es la coordinadora del Grupo Museo Geológico Nacional José Rollo y Gómez del Servicio Geológico Colombiano, desde donde estamos transmitiendo en este momento. Aquí estoy rodeada de rocas y fósiles de fauna marina y todos los que estamos trabajando aquí en la producción y en los contenidos de esta transmisión estamos fascinados mirando cada una de las vitrinas. Ojalá puedan ustedes venir a visitar este museo, es fascinante. Pero bueno, continúo con la presentación de Marcela, quien en este museo contribuye al desarrollo de la paleontología de vertebrados y a la profesionalización de todos los aspectos del museo. Su objeto de estudio es la paleontología de vertebrados y geología sedimentaria, con intereses especiales en reptiles marinos como el plesiosaurio de Colombia y también en museología y en geología en general. Fue docente en los departamentos de geociencias de la Universidad EAFIT y en los Andes y ha sido voluntaria en museos de ciencias de la Tierra en Cambridge. Buenas tardes y bienvenida, Marcela.
Hello everybody. Today I want to show you the research we have been doing for the last few years about the Paja formation, mainly of the paleontological site that we found there. So to start, I want to show you or tell you about a bit of the Cretaceous world. So the Cretaceous world was a greenhouse. What does it mean? That we had at the time very high atmospheric CO2. The temperature was much higher than today. We're talking about 23 degrees compared to today 15 that we have in average in today's world. Also was characterized by not having polar ice caps or very reduced, which result in having these high global sea levels. It is also because of the high plate tectonic activity. At this time of the geological history, we have two mid-oceanic ridges separating these continents, which cause also these anoxic events that we mentioned before. The result of these high sea levels is that the Cretaceous is considered a water world. It means that we have many or numerous continental seas around the Earth. This picture is a paleogeographic reconstruction of the Cretaceous in general. So it doesn't mean that all these epicontinental seas were at the same time. But it's very important to notice that we have these sort of seas in the continents that we recognize today as Australia, Northern Africa, the European archipelago, the northern of North America, and one of the most important ones recently, that is this of Northern South America. That is what we're going to talk about today. But what were these epicontinental seas? So most of these I mentioned before are characterized by having depths, water depths of 100 meters, a bit more sometimes. They had reduced circulation of the waters due to this depth. And they were characterized by having these fine-grained sediments, mostly black mudstones with fossils preserved on them. And they were also very susceptible to have anoxia, all this caused by the reduced circulation of the waters, which means that the high primary productivity of organic carbon was preserved in this rock. We're going to talk about an epicontinental sea where we have the geological record in Colombia in the Boyacá department, that is marked here in red, particularly in this province called Ricaurte. This was traditionally called the Villa de Leyva area, but recently when we have been in these communities, they have asked us that it's not just Villa de Leyva municipality, but also Sáchica, Sutamarchán, and probably Santa Sofia also have these paleontological sediments. So what they prefer to be called is the south of the Ricaurte. That's why we use this name. This area is very well studied in our country. Is known by the sediments of the Cretaceous, where we focus in the formation. We are really here standing on the shoulders of giants This has been studied for the last 60 years, and we have a very good stratigraphic control, as well as numerous sedimentological and stratigraphical studies. In general, I can tell you the Paja Formation that you can see here in this very generalized geological map and stratigraphic column overlies the Ritoque Formation in a paraconformal way and has a gradational contact with the San Gil group. It has traditionally divided into three members: the arcillolitas negras, the arcillolitas abigarradas, and arcillolitas con nódulos huecos, and traditionally has been interpreted as a shallow marine sea and evaporative subca environment. So today, what I'm going to show you is another tool that hasn't been used to interpret these environments and understand the Paja seas, and is the paleontology from the point of view of the paleobiology. So what I'm going to show you is that the Paja Formation preserves a very rich fossil fauna that includes marine reptiles, marine invertebrates, mainly the ammonites, and some terrestrial flora and fauna, which allow us to reinterpret this environment. So to start with the marine reptiles, we have many groups that are found in the sediments. One of them is the plesiosaurs in general. Plesiosaurs are divided into groups: the long neck plesiosaurs and the short neck pliosaurs. Both types have been recovered from this formation. However, what we have seen in the Paja Formation is that actually this simple division of short neck and long neck is actually much more complex due to the variability we found in this new fauna, which has proved that the study of these sediments and these fossils is really key to understand the phylogeny and transition from the Jurassic to the Cretaceous. So to start with the plesiosaurs, that are, call them simply the long neck ones, we have at the moment probably 4 specimens found. So just only 2 of them have been described, and that was as early as in the 1940s. The name of these fossils is Calahuayasaurus colombiensis. As you can see, we have very well articulated specimens, and we have here complete skeletons with craniums and flippers, and is an amazing preservation. As you can see as well, they are 3-dimensional, and the structures and features are very clear. So it's an excellent preservation of this specimen. Some of these plesiosaurs that we found in the collections of different places, especially in the University of California in Berkeley, still have the sediments that contain them. They were not fully prepared. And they show us this fibrous mineral that is gypsum that seems to be parallel to the layers, to the sediments. However, a closer look shows us that actually this is not really parallel, are actually lenses that crosses the stratification, which means they were probably not a primary deposit, but actually the cause of diagenesis. Here we can see as well that some of these fibrous minerals, sometimes gypsum, sometimes calcite, actually crosses perpendicular the beds, which is also an important feature to recognize the origin of these minerals. In terms of the pliosaurs, we have so far described new species. We have the Kronosaurus, the Acostosaurus, the Sachicasaurus, and Stenorhynchosaurus. What we have here is huge animals that probably overpass the 10 meters in length, indicating probably quite a few tons of weight, very large animals, probably or likely to live in open seas. They come probably to these continental seas for feeding or mating, or well, that is not the point of this paper, but indicates that definitely they came for a specific reason, but they live in the open seas. Again, I want to emphasize in the 3-dimensionality of the preservation, also in the exquisite detail that some of these specimens have, like Acostosaurus, that we can see even some parts of the soft tissues within the skull. So it's really an amazing type of preservation for these organisms. Other very important marine reptile that we found in the Paja seas is the group of the ichthyosaurs. This group actually has many specimens, many more than the Plesiosaurs, but only 2 have been described so far. As far as I know, there are some PhD students at the moment studying all the other skulls that we have found. And what it shows is that it's going to revolutionize the phylogeny of ichthyosaurs of the lower Cretaceous. These organisms were also living in the open seas. Because of their size of their socket for the eyeball, you can see as well that they were not very shallow organisms. They live in the deep sea sometimes and probably come to these epicontinental seas for other reasons. Another very interesting group we have preserved in the Paja Formation are the turtles. These marine organisms were also very big. These 2 particularly are very nicely preserved. It's very difficult to find them in this way. These Levachelis, you can see broken, fractured, and missing some parts, but probably is biased mostly for collection reasons than actually preservation. And something very important we found in the collections as well is this skull of this Matochelis that is associated to turtle eggs. So although the eggs have been used as evidence of the proximity to the shoreline, what we found is that the very few remains of turtle eggs in the different collections in Colombia and in the University of California were actually found within the bones of the turtle, meaning that probably these were the mothers that haven't laid the eggs and still carrying them within their bodies, which also changes a little bit the way we can see the proximity to the shoreline. The other very important organisms within the invertebrates were the ammonites. For most of the Colombians that we know Villa de Leyva, ammonites are incredibly abundant, and some of them preserve the most delicate structures like spines and other ornamentation. Ammonites were very common to find just walking around the area. Today is not so much like that, collection, but definitely underground there is still quite abundant. This is very important because ammonites are a type of cephalopods, and these cephalopods are very sensitive to salinity in the water. Because of the abundance of these ammonites, we definitely think that salinity in these Paja seas wouldn't be very high. It has to be normal salinity. Normal anyway means in this sort of seas. So there was no hypersalinity in these seas. Otherwise, these ammonites wouldn't have been able to be so successful and abundant. Another invertebrate that we found that also caught our attention is this benthic type of bivalve, the inoceramics. We found it in these fibrous sediment, in these fibrous minerals. Sometimes, or very often, you find lenses of these fibrous minerals in the Paja Formation, but sometimes it's gypsum, and sometimes, like in these ones, it's calcite. And when we open them through this line that join the 2 parts of the calcite, we found these inoceramics and sometimes some very little gastropods. This is important because it shows some benthic fauna. It's very scarce in the Paja Formation. This is an also very important horizon we found within the Paja Formation. What we have here is a piece of wood completely colonized by bivalves. Here in the drawing, we try to explain that a bit better. This is today's boring bivalves. What they do is pierce the wood and they live there floating in the drifting wood in the oceans. And what shows us here is exactly that we have a fully contained piece of wood with bivalves, indicating that probably there was proximity to the shoreline, but at the same time, the wood float or drifted in the sea for many, probably months or weeks, allowing the colonization of these bivalves. Probably when there were too many, the wood sank, and that's how it was preserved. What we found today is that inside these burrows, we can find the original organism preserved, probably as well with the soft parts. This is under investigation as well. One of the most amazing discoveries in the last few years, this is about 2015, was the remains of this huge piece of vertebral column, the lower part of the only dinosaur found in Colombia. So we have a sauropod, probably a titanosauriform brachiosaur dinosaur. So also shows certain proximity to the shoreline, but also shows that it has been drifting in the water for a while. So probably not so close at all. But this was a finding made by Comis Cruz in 2011. And you can see the exquisite preservation of this very fine ornamentation of what seems like to be wings. So it seems like it's a very rare insect, probably a dragonfly, indicating also an amazing preservation of this fauna and flora, as I show you. What do we have here is also, during the lower Cretaceous, was the times where the first flowers appear. And what we have in this area of the country is a numerous amount of ferns and seeds, some angiosperms, but also I think in these concretions that we recently found, there is some seeds that are giving us some insights into what will be the flowering plants. So although this area of the study is not well developed yet in our country, we think the potential for the paleobotany in this area is enormous. This shows also proximity to the seashore and together with these pieces of wood. These are pieces of wood, mostly calcified and some silicified, like the ones on this side. And we have found here, we show some parts, but we have found actually complete trunks that measure about 5 or 4 meters long. So indicating also some drifting of the wood from a near continent. So based on this very quick overview about the paleontology and a bit of the paleobiology of these organisms, we want to present this interpretation. So the first and most important is that we recognize that because of the quality and quantity of these fossils, Paja formation is definitely a large study. A large study means that it's a paleontological site with exceptional fossil preservation. This represents one of the very few recognized of the lower Cretaceous, particularly for marine reptiles. So what we have here is a window into the lower Cretaceous that allow us to see how was life crossing from the Jurassic to the upper Cretaceous that are very well-known localities around the world, the upper Cretaceous in North America and the Jurassic in Europe. So what we can see from what we recover from the collections, the field, and the various studies is that, well, we have our country located about in the same position as today, so 5 to 7 degrees north of the equator. That means we are just beneath the ascending leaf of the Hadley cell. This is characterized to be a zone of abundant rainfall and a tropical storm belt. Why? Because we have the sun directly above, therefore we have very warm, well-lit, high primary productivity. Also because the closest to the continents, we have a high nutrient input. And although with these characteristics, we don't know the water depth, we can say that climate was probably moist and rainy, which contradicts what has been interpreted as an evaporative Safka environment. Those Safka environments are characterized usually to be present in these desert belts, so actually over the 30 north and south degrees from the equator. The other thing we can conclude, or we can see part of our evidence, is that the fauna was dominated by the pelagic organisms. The pelagic ones are those living within the water column, so all these marine reptiles that were really large animals, open sea animals, but also we have fish and ammonites and these pseudoplanktonic bivalves drifting in pieces of wood. So definitely there was a high primary productivity in the water, so these animals interacting and feeding themselves and having all these biological activities. Indicating obviously very abundant oxygen in the surface waters. That's mainly marked by the presence of the cephalopods and the fish that are really intolerant to low levels of oxygen. This primary productivity also produces carbon dioxide. Salinity is another important issue. The abundance of the ammonites definitely show us very normal marine environments according to salinity. So those interpretations about hypersaline waters that produce those sabkas are not really very agreeable with what we found with the fauna. This epicontinental sea was not restricted in the sense of having physical barriers. They were actually connected to the open sea that allows these huge marine reptiles to come and feed themselves probably in these warm seas. What we have in the benthic part, in the bottom of the sea, the rocks are characterized to be very fine-grained. So we don't have coarse grain like conglomerates, for example, which indicates a low energy depositional environment. And here we're talking about 30 to 40 meters probably. However, from time to time, as we can see in here, we have these storm deposits. Seems like as we remember, the storm wave baseline is about 60 meters. So probably this sea we're talking about was under the 60 meters because these deposits are very occasional, very rare. So probably very big storms that happen and disturb a bit the seafloor. So what we see is that the Paja Sea was very dynamic. The pycnocline, that is that line that divides different densities, for example, was periodically broken due to these storms. And this, I'm using this image to show you a bit how it looks or could look, that benthic environment. This is taken from the ecology of fossils, but from a formation that is in the Jurassic, but is just to be a bit helped with the explanation. So what we found with the benthic fauna is that it's very impoverished. That means there were very few organisms that actually live in the bottom of these seas. We don't have evidence of finding any sponges or corals or bryozoans or brachiopods. And we found just very few bivalves. The inoceramids one we talk about, that were between the calcitic lenses. And well, so not much evidence about organisms populating the seafloor. There is also not many evidence of sedimentary structures, just very few storm deposits. And in the vertebrate fossils, we didn't find any signals of scavengers or epibionts that could be feeding from them. So what we have in the field is actually that most rocks, fresh, are black. And studies from different oil companies and other investigations have shown that the Paja Formation had high levels of TOC. So to preserve this organic matter, we need to have a very low oxygenated water, so probably getting to the anoxias or the presence of oxygen. What does it mean is that this no oxygen in the bottom was the cause for not having this benthic fauna living on the seafloor. Only with a very few, like the inoceramids, some annelid worms that we have found in few samples, and some microbial mats. They have been interpreted as algae. We didn't went deep into recognize them, but because of the conditions, it possibly could also be a bacterial mass, an algae. Also, there is lots of pyrite that is a good indicator of this anoxic environment. Other interesting thing we saw was the concretions. As you can see here, we can follow and we can see the evidence of this differential compaction. So these concretions are actually formed during the diagenesis, and these were crossed by the gypsum and the calcite, indicating again that these gypsum and calcite are not primary deposits, are actually effects of the diagenetic process, so secondary deposit. To finish, we have this diagram where we show how is this model. This is not to scale, and what we want to show is the interaction. We have the sun warming up these waters, allowing some evaporation of the surface waters that allows the waves caused by the wind to mix. So we have an oxygenated top sea in contact with the open ocean. So we have all this pelagic fauna living here, from big reptiles to ammonites and some probably plankton. We have a huge input from the continent, so we have high nutrients. We can see that from these terrestrial organisms that were drifting in the sea and then deposited in those bottom anoxic waters. This division here is the pycnocline, probably related to temperature more than any other thing, and allows this environment to be anoxic and have this wonderful preservation of the marine organisms. And in this one, we want to show is how the Paja Sea developed during time. So we have at the beginning of the Cretaceous, coast grain and very low sea level, and how sea levels start increasing, but at the same time, due to the storms, sometimes disrupted this pycnocline, and the bottom waters were intermittent. So sometimes there was anoxia in the seafloor, and sometimes there was the oxygenated waters that allowed the colonization of some of the benthic fauna. That's most of what happens at the beginning of the deposition of the Cretaceous sequence. But when we get to the Paja Formation, probably in these areas where this pycnocline reached its highest level and allowed the preservation of these big marine reptiles. So conclusions, we have that the Paja Formation of this area was between 60 and 130 meters deep. We have a tripartite division of the water, warm surface waters, well lit, well mixed, and with normal salinity, while the bottom waters were disoxic and anoxic with low levels of oxygen and high levels of sulfides. The upper and lower water masses were separated by the pycnocline that seems to be defined by the temperature. However, probably other chemical products also influence, but definitely not by the salinity differences. The Paja formations, we see the development were dynamic, but definitely were occasional storm-driven oxygenation of the seafloor that allows the colonization of certain benthic organisms. And the presence of this gypsum and calcite beef or fibrous habit were secondary, not primary in deposition. Is probably the result of diagenetic fluids that also affected other parts of the country during these times of the geological history. So that's all for now. So thank you very much. This is a very short overview of what we have been doing in the Paja Formation. And I thank everybody for listening and hope you download the chapter from the website. And thank you very much to the Geology of Colombia book team for allowing this space to present our work. Thank you.